Previously on the black ship. Wyatt closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and turned to Cynthia. I promised you that I would tell you about my experience with the Drazan. He turned to Clara while a fire raged in his chest. Do you wish to know why I know what they do? Please, Clara said firmly. He snarled. Obey. Come now, children, form a line and obey my instructions. Wyatt heard his instructor order as he stopped pushing against his friend and classmate, Wisto. The brown-haired kid took this chance to shove him, putting a little more force into his shoulder, causing him to fall out of line and nearly tumble. Behind him, several more of his friends and other classmates laughed, chuckled, and giggled at his near blunder. Wyatt, for his part, was smiling mischievously. You cheated, he exclaimed, his voice soft to avoid getting the attention of Miss Carla. He certainly didn't want to miss out on recess again, or worse, being forbidden from going to Valak, the habitable moon in the neighboring system. He'd been so damn excited for the scheduled field trip, had done all his homework, got some of the best grades in class, and his parents signed the permits that allowed him to go. Wisto smirked. You snooze, you lose, Wyatt, he taunted. Wyatt huffed in indignation but accepted the result of their little game. Fine, you won. Happy? Very, Wisto remarked. Now I get to eat your Lakoa ration too. Why do you like Lakoas so much anyway? They're tasty but feel so gross to chew on. The voice of Waldya coming directly from behind them got their attention. The two young boys turned to see the young girl with short black hair, giving them both a disgusted expression. You kidding, right, Waldya? Wyatt replied. Lakoas are so good. You can chew on them a lot and always crack. Yeah, and the gooey juice is sour but yummy, Wisto added, both kids ganging against their classmate and friend. But they're bugs, another voice protested, and the three kids turned to the front, where the black-haired Wantum was glancing back at them, his expression crestfallen and sickly. Why do you like bugs so much? They're so creepy. Wyatt moved closer to his friend and draped an arm around his neck. Then why don't you give me yours, eh? I lost mine and I don't want to miss out on a tasty, crunchy, gooey Lachoa, he said with a wide smirk, only managing to not laugh by the skin of his teeth when he saw Wantum's face turn slightly green at his description of the bug. You can have it! Just don't say anything else about those things, okay, Wyatt? Wantum relented and Wyatt released him, smiling victoriously as he did so. Too bad Waff didn't score high enough. I'm sure this is going to be a lot of fun, Waldya said suddenly, hoping to divert the conversation away from the bugs. Yeah, my big brother told me that Valak has a lower gravity and we can jump higher, Wisto exclaimed, already imagining how much fun he was going to have. I bet playing tag or racing will be pretty funny. Keep your moon to yourself, Wisto. I want to know what it's like to be in space, Wyatt said, looking at the sky with longing and wonder. Space is dangerous, Wyatt, Wantum said. 2 of my uncles and Aunt Wumu died in an accident. I'll never understand what you see in space. It's just empty, Wisto added. I don't know either, Wyatt. My mom works in the space dock and she says she likes it. Space sounds pretty boring to me, Waldya said, then smiled widely. But visiting another planet? Just imagine how many other animals and plants there are. Space isn't boring. I mean, we're drifting in space right now. Space is everything. Exploring space is why we are here, Wyatt exclaimed enthusiastically before clasping his mouth shut when Miss Carla shot him a knowing glance from the front of the line. Sorry, he apologized, while his friends shared a quiet laugh. You're just dumbheads, he proclaimed, sticking out his tongue at his friends. Wyatt and his friends continued to walk, following the line made by his other classmates and other classrooms from his school. Thanks to the work of his parents, they could afford his education nicely, and he repaid in kind by scoring high notes and earning the right to study for another year, ensuring that he wouldn't become a destitute commoner. As he walked, he looked around the spaceport. It was a large collection of buildings and dozens upon dozens of landing zones for shuttles, fighters, gunships, and other small vessels waiting to go to the orbital space dock. The distant noise of engines coming to life caught his attention, and he looked in time to see a shuttle ascend to the heavens. He looked at it with longing desire. Ever since he could remember, he looked up to the stars, wishing to be there among the blackness of space. He was still just a kid. The thought of entering a guild or earning the grades and records needed to enlist in the Royal Navy and study at the academy was in his mind. But for now, he would enjoy his first trip to space and a safe time studying on another planet, or moon, as it was the case. The shuttle was long gone, and he returned his attention to solid ground. He focused on his friend, a smile spread over his lips. He'd known them ever since he started his education, and the five of them spent most of their time at school together. Waff was missing, and he felt bad that his friend was going to miss out on going to space. Space. The thought alone always brought a smile to his face and made him feel all giddy and eager to grow up and become a pilot. "Wyatt Staples, pilot of battleships," he muttered frantically, cheeks blushing with excitement as he imagined himself piloting one of those massive ships. "There you go again, Wyatt," Waldya said quietly, tapping his shoulder. "Daydreaming about things that can't happen." "Just 'cause I'm not a noble ain't gonna stop me, Waldya," Wyatt remarked with a cheeky grin. "I'll become a pilot, and I'll take all of you on rides and stuff." The young girl rolled her eyes but said nothing else. They continued to walk for a few minutes in an orderly fashion until she noticed something. Patting Wyatt's shoulder to get his attention, she pointed across the field at another line of young children dressed in uniforms similar to their own but with different colors. They're from Northside," Waldya groaned, still pointing at the kids from that school. Wyatt laughed. "You really don't like Northside, do you?" "Nope," Waldya replied, glaring at the students. "Are you still mad they beat our team?" Wistow asked, unamused. "They cheated. I know they cheated. I practiced for 3 whole months," Waldya said, crossing her arms. Why wouldn't they practice too? Maybe they practiced harder than you?" Wantum offered, trying to calm her down. It didn't work. If anything, he only fanned the flames and redirected her fury to him. "At least I practiced." "You were last place in the run, Wantum. You should spend more time working and less time reading, lazy butt," Waldya hissed at her friend. A quiet discussion broke between the two, and Waldya moved forth while Wyatt and Wistow let her through, just so she could chew out Wantum freely. "Why must he always try to reason with her when she's moody?" "She's more stubborn than you, Wyatt," Wistow whispered, afraid that the rowdy girl would hear him. "I'm not stubborn. I'm dedicated," Wyatt replied, matching his friend's volume. Then the two shared a laugh, and his attention shifted to the Northside students. Other than the colors of their school's district, their uniforms were identical. It was cheaply made, red with blue instead of the green with yellow uniform he was wearing. All schools competed against each other in various events, be it in exams or competitions, and many had rivals. His school, Forest Line, was Northside's rival and vice versa, though he didn't understand why. The competitions were fun, and he was part of his grade's competing team. Nothing of notice happened until Miss Carla blew her whistle and the line came to a dead halt. Every child instantly obeyed the command. The reason for their sudden stop was apparent when a figure dressed in high-quality clothing and bearing the symbol of House Gimor, the rulers of Volantis, came into view. Miss Carla bowed before the figure, a tall, handsome, and impassive short-haired man no older than 25 with gray, cybernetic eyes. When the greeting was over, she raised her hand and made a command. "Good morning, your lordship," Wyatt said in unison along with the rest of his friends and classmates. "Thank you for visiting us," he said, and noticed the man smiled slightly, pleased by the welcome. The young boy smiled, happy that his efforts had pleased a noble. "I see that there are more children this year," Wyatt heard the nobleman speak as he walked down the line of children while Miss Carla walked at his side but kept her distance from the nobleman. "Oh yes, your lordship. Our students have truly excelled for the past 2 years. Many show promise and intelligence that should ensure a capable and educated, highly productive working force once their studies are concluded," Miss Carla said, smiling, trying hard to not brag about the progress of her students. "Huh," the man snorted, eyeing each kid with contempt. "That, or commoners simply cannot resist the urge to reproduce," he stated, unimpressed. He didn't know why, but Wyatt felt like the noble wanted to say something else. Something hurtful, but barely managed to hold back his tongue. That was all right. He was a noble. His parents and his teachers always told him to obey and respect nobles because they were superior to mere commoners. Only the noisy Mr. Warlow seemed to have a different opinion. "I assure you, your lordship, that my students are, in fact, efficient and intelligent. For commoners, that is," she added shortly after. "I suppose. Nothing much can be expected from commoners. But as a member of House Guymore, I have been chosen to oversee this trip and give credit to their competitive skills. House Guymore extends its protection over our territory, and as such, it is part of our duties to ensure this frivolous exercise is carried out." He sighed tiredly. "Some traditions are rather boorish and obtuse, don't you think so?" "Of course, your lordship. However, they are traditions for a reason, yes?" Miss Carla replied in a non-committal manner. Wyatt frowned. He hated hearing smart-sounding words. He didn't know what they meant. But something told him those words were not nice ones. "How many children are in total?" the noble asked, and his voice became harder to hear as he walked down the line. On the freighter, Forest Line was assigned to 571 students, with 18. "Members should," Miss Carla replied, and then they were gone, and Wyatt couldn't hear them anymore. "I don't like nobles," Wantum said in a whispered tone, gaining the attention of his friends. "My dad made a mistake at work, and a noble lashed him 5 times. Nobles are mean." "It's your dad's fault for making a mistake, Tem," Wistow replied, but his tone was of understanding. "Many nobles are mean, but not all of them are. Miss Carla is nice, ain't she?" "Yeah," Wyatt agreed. "She's not hit a student since last year. Wezzo was a piece of poop." His friends gasped at the use of the profanity. "I'm happy he got kicked out." Literally kicked out, too. He remembered it clearly. After Miss Carla caught Wezzo, a student a grade above him, beating younger students and saying that he was a noble, Miss Carla used her beating stick to, well, beat Wezzo until he curled into a ball, crying. Miss Carla then forced him to stand up and marched him out of Forest Line, ending it all with a kick that sent him flying across the entrance. He couldn't stop laughing that day, and was glad that Wezzo was gone for good, and he knew that his friends were happy too. "Just keep your mouth shut, okay? Mama always tells me to keep those open onions." "Thoughts to yourself," Waldia whispered. The 4 friends nodded eagerly, sealing their lips. A few minutes later, Wyatt saw Miss Carla jogging back on her own until she reached the front of the line. She blew the whistle twice, and the line continued to walk. It didn't take long for them to reach their destination, a large old shuttle big enough to carry, at most, 50 passengers. Wyatt quickly noticed that there were several other shuttles lined up and ready for departure as soon as they were boarded. The gentle but constant thrumming of the engines, the smell of metal and rust, and the knowledge that he was about to hop into an aircraft for the first time in his life filled him with a sudden sense of unease and trepidation. He noticed that his friends and many other of his classmates shared his sentiment. A sharp whistle blow from Miss Carla reduced his fear and looked at her as she brought a megaphone up to her mouth. "Remember, children, you will board the shuttles in an orderly manner and take your seat. You then will be strapped to your seats before the shuttle takes off and flies toward the space dock. There's no need to be afraid." He liked Miss Carla. She was a good vice principal and a great teacher, but her words did little to make his fear go away. As the line advanced, along with the closing noise of small feet hitting the metal floor of the shuttle, his fear grew, and his heart began to race in his chest. He was about to board the shuttle when he froze, staring at the maw of the craft. Before Miss Carla or the kid behind him said anything to him, he clenched his hands into fists, took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and took a step forth. Then another, and finally a third. When he opened them again, he was inside the shuttle, and as if a switch had been flipped, all of his fear and anxiety turned into excitement and joyful eagerness. He smiled widely and moved quickly to sit next to Wistow while Waldia and Wantum sat on the following seats. "Pfft!" Waldia bit on her lower lip to avoid laughing out loud. "You were shivering like a Clixel chick." "I was not," Wyatt replied, embarrassed. I was excited, that's all." "It's okay, Wyatt. I was scared too," Wantum, ever the peacemaker, said. Wistow only smiled and elbowed his friend on the ribs playfully. Shortly after, the shuttle was full, and several men wearing staff utility uniforms came in to secure them to their seats. Within moments, they were done and left without ever exchanging a single word. The murmurs and quiet conversation between the children died out when the shuttle's gate began to close as metallic groaning made all of them wince. The gate locked itself with a hiss of pressurized air and the lights turned red. A collective gasp echoed inside the shuttle's bay when the engines roared to life and they were suddenly pushed down onto their seats. The discomfort remained, and Wyatt could hear the wind outside rocking against the shuttle's hull as it moved through the air at incredible speeds. There were no windows or display screens to see the outside, which was a shame. He always wanted to see the land from high above with his own eyes. Slowly but surely, the discomfort lessened until the point it no longer felt as if something was trying to squish him. The ride continued for several minutes, in which he only shared glances between his friends and a few of his other classmates. But he knew the ride was coming to an end when a feeling of weightlessness began to overtake him. A few gasped, others squealed in surprise, and a few laughed. He only smiled. He was in space. He was in space. Then he noticed it. He couldn't hear the air outside the shuttle or its engines. He could still feel them rumbling from his seat and by how the metal throbbed gently, but nothing more than that. "I'm in space," he muttered to himself, so excited that he wanted to jump, shout, run, and cry all at the same time. "Freaky," Waldya said, shuddering. "Feels like I could float without my restraints." "You would," Wantum agreed. "Gravity works weird here, but yeah, you would float." Wisto smiled, and his entire body trembled with excitement. "I can't wait to get to Valak! This is gonna be great! I thought my big bro was pulling my leg! This is awesome!" The muttering noises spread across the shuttle's bay until the feeling of weightlessness increased for a few moments before disappearing completely. The roaring of the engines returned, and a moment later the groan of metal pressing against metal was also heard. Wyatt felt an eternity pass as the faint noises of more shuttles arriving and the clamoring of boots reached him. Finally, the gate hissed and groaned. The red light turned white, and the gate began to lower itself to reveal that they had arrived at the space dock. Similarly, when they departed, several men wearing uniforms rushed in and began to unbuckle their seats. When they were done, they left, and moments later a noble wearing a Navy uniform came into view. "Right side, stand up and march out in an orderly fashion," the man ordered, utterly disinterested in the kids. But the kids obeyed and slowly made their way out of the shuttle. Before the last in line could walk out, the noble spoke again. "Left side, stand up and follow." Wyatt and his friends stood from tier seats in unison alongside his other classmates and obeyed the orders from the noble. When he made it out of the shuttle, he marveled at the sight before him. The landing bay was huge and completely encased by metal. Numerous shuttles lined up next to each other, all of them unloading their cargo. He couldn't immediately see where they had arrived from until he noticed the shimmering glow of a kinetic field at the far, far end of the bay. The familiar whistle made itself known a few moments later, and he turned to see Miss Carla lined up with the rest of the school's staff and teachers selected to guide and watch over them during the trip. "Forest line, follow me, don't step out of line," Miss Carla commanded, and the students obeyed diligently. Being in the first group, Wyatt marveled at the sight of the walls and architecture he'd only seen in books and videos. To anyone familiar with the station or principality's standard design, it was nothing to gawk at. But for a kid who dreamt of being among the stars, everything sparkled with wonder. "I thought it was going to be cold," Waldya said. "Space is cold, right?" "Maybe outside," Wantum replied, unsure. "Smarty Pants don't know?" Wyatt poked, but Wantum just shook his head and Wisto chuckled. After long minutes of a mostly silent walk, they arrived at a large room where many adults were waiting for them alongside a huge amount of containers and folded clothes. Miss Carla stopped, and the other staff members guided the rest of the first group while the rest of the line waited outside. "Now, children, you'll behave and let these kind people put on your suits. You'll need them before we leave for Valak. Remember how we practiced?" "Yes, Miss Carla," the children said in unison. With a nod from the woman, the men and women began to unfold the clothes that were, as Miss Carla said, suits. Gray, ugly things. Fortunately, they didn't need to take off their uniforms as Wyatt and his friends were instructed on how to put them on. The suit wasn't bulky and it wasn't heavy either, but it certainly wasn't new as some wear and tear could be seen on its surface. But it'll do. Finally, When he was done putting on his suit and the front sealed itself, a helmet that was almost entirely a simple screen was placed over his head, and with a hiss, it was sealed. A minute later, the entire group was fully suited, and the children moved their extremities around, testing and experimenting with the strange suit. "Group 1, follow me," said one of the staff members, while Miss Carla remained back to organize the other groups. Still, Wyatt and his friends obeyed and were surprised that the suits didn't make walking difficult, aside from getting used to the added bulk of the suits. It didn't take long for them to arrive at another vast room, but this time, it had something the others didn't. Windows. It had windows. All cohesion and organization broke as kids started to break formation and run toward the large windows, pressing their hands and visors against the glass as they let out oohs and ahs of amazement. Wyatt watched as his friends joined the rest of his classmates, but he didn't run. His feet were glued as he watched from a few meters behind them at the beautiful sight of the round gem that was Volantis, his homeworld. He could see those azure oceans, the vast, ample continents visible from his vantage point, the clouds, and the thin sheet of blue and violet light surrounding the planet. Behind it, he could see the blackness of space and faint dots spread across the void. He couldn't help it. He smiled from ear to ear and lifted his arms above his head in triumph. "I'm in space!" One thing that the videos and books always fail to mention about space travel is the wait time in which little can be done. For kids, that counted as double. The crew members of the transport freighter Wyatt had boarded days prior could at least count on their duties to keep them busy. But having to carry and care for over 500 children in a confined space, no matter how big the allure of Jas, their designated freighter, was, it represented a monumental task. Miss Carla and the rest of the staff, of course, planned around it by having the kids attend regular lessons aboard the ship and prepare for the games and competitions that they would hold against the other schools. But after the lessons were over and practice was done, there was nothing to do. There were no toys to play with, no video screens or shows to distract the children, and worst of all, the ship was not equipped with a playground or any other sort of equipment. The crew members were also distant and cold, and instructed to not interact with them. And no matter how disciplined a child may be, a child is still a child, and the greatest motivator for a child everywhere is boredom. "We shouldn't be here," Wantum argued as he crawled through the ducts he and his friend found. Without anything better to do and having had enough of waiting in their bunks doing nothing, curiosity got the best of them, and managed to sneak out to do some inoffensive exploring. "You can go back if you want," Wisto countered. "We've been traveling for 5 days, and I'm so bored. I thought traveling in space was fast." "Only FTL jumps are fast," Wantum answered, following Wisto's lead. Behind him, Wyatt and Waldya followed suit, crawling slowly to avoid making any loud sounds. "Where do you think this tunnel leads to?" Waldya asked. "What if it is dangerous?" "Somewhere with something to do," Wyatt answered with a groan. "We can't even watch space." "You want to watch the void? What's the difference from staring at the ceilings of our bunks?" Wisto retorted with a groan. "Besides, if we could pull the panel off, it means there's nothing to fear, right?" "If you say so," Waldya said, sighing deeply. "I don't know how Mom can work without getting bored. There's nothing to do here, and that's the only reason I'm following you, buttheads." Wyatt chuckled. "And who was the one that found the pain and showed it to us?" A punch to his left thigh was his answer. "Ouch!" "Dumbhead," Waldya growled. "Hey, quiet down back there. I think I see the end of the tunnel," Wisto said before speeding up a little more. When he reached the end of the vent, he came face to face with a similar grilled panel. He pushed against it, and to his surprise, it only took him a few pushes for it to fall to the ground with a weak clang. Crawling after his friends, Wyatt came out to find a large storage bay with several secured containers, boxes, and equipment scattered around the place. He helped Waldya out before the 4 of them began to walk around, eyeing each piece they came across. Suddenly, they heard other footsteps in the distance and came to a halt. As a group, they moved behind a large container, making as little sound as possible, waiting to see who or what was there with them. Huddling together and only daring to peek from the side, they heard a hushed voice. "I swear I heard something coming from here," said a young, high-pitched voice before a group of 6 children appeared. Maybe we should leave, said another. The 4 friends exchanged glances, relieved to see more of their classmates before Wisto walked out from their hiding spot waving an arm. Hey, he began, I see that we're not the only ones who found the vents, huh? He announced before Wantem, Waldia, and Wyatt stepped out, joining him. The 6 other kids were startled initially but relaxed when they saw them. Yeah, we were bored of being bored, said the leader of the group. Hey, I know you. You're Wisto Jun from the first group, right? The one and only, Wisto exclaimed, earning a sigh from Waldia and a chuckle from Wantem and Wyatt. What group are you from? 7th group. Oh, name's Owen, he said, offering a hand to Wisto. The 2 shook hands and the 2 groups mingled. Say, when did you get here? Not too long ago, Wyatt answered. We were hoping to find somewhere to play and, stretch a bit. Owen and the rest of his group nodded, sharing his sentiment. We've been here for... How long again, Willow? Almost an hour, I think, the girl replied. For some time, and we haven't seen any adults. I think this part of the ship is locked down or something, Owen guessed. Then his eyes widened and sparkled the way only a child with a brilliant idea can achieve. Hey, why don't we all play tag or hide and seek? This place is big enough for us to have some fun. Now that was an idea everyone could get behind. What if we play prey and hunter first? Offered one child from Owen's group. Oh, I want to play catch the clicksall, Willow said enthusiastically. We'd need more to play that. What if we start with tag and then hide and seek? Maybe more of us will show up, Wantem proposed. Thus the argument began, but it was a short-lived one. An agreement was reached, and tag would be the name of the game, with Wyatt volunteering to be the starting it. He loved tag, and unlike his friends, he enjoyed being it. After giving his classmates a 5-second head start, he broke into a run. He didn't go right after Wantem, the slowest of them all. Instead, he focused on another target. Doing his best to scatter his classmates around, he smiled when he saw Wisto trying to hide behind a container. Tag! He shouted only loud enough for Wisto to hear him. He let a few seconds pass before running behind the container and hiding next to a worried Wisto. That was fast, he noted in a hushed volume. Kinda like we are. Wyatt was about to execute his plan, but his friend's words intrigued him. What do you mean by that? Oh, right, you went to the toilet, Wisto recalled. Miss Carla was talking with his lordship and said something about being out of formation with the other ships, he shrugged. I don't know how that can happen in space, though. Miss Carla then complained that we were half a day ahead. He paused for a moment. I think his lordship ordered the ship to go faster because he wanted to get to the Valak first or something. Cool. Then that means we'll get to see Valak first and run around like you wanted, Wisto, Wyatt exclaimed with a smile and patted his friend's shoulder. Oh, and tag, you're it, he said before breaking off into a run, leaving behind a puzzled Wisto. With a cry of outrage, Wisto stood up and ran after his friend. Come back here, trickster! Wyatt only laughed and ran faster before Wisto gave up and went after another target. The following hour was spent eagerly between the 10 original children and then by 13 more who eventually found their way to that same area. They played several games, from prey to hunter, to catch the clicksall, and even partially recreated burning hedges without a ball. But with so many children confined into a singular space offering so many possibilities for them despite the lack of toys, balls, or flags, a consensus was reached that hide-and-seek would be extra fun and difficult with the idea of it serving as practice for the coming competitions against other schools. As the kids scattered to hide, Wyatt moved with purpose to a single possible location. He had mapped the area during their games and quickly discerned the best hiding spots available. He was the tracker of his grade's competing team, and he was darn good at it. Capture the flag, track the Lakoa, find the secret stones, and target practice were his favorite competitions, and he always excelled in his role. Defeats stung, but he didn't mind them much. He valued having fun more than winning or losing as long as he could do it along with his friends. And if he could gain some extra points for his grading records in the process, all the better. It also didn't hurt that he got free extra rations whenever his team got high scores. He smiled when he spotted his chosen hiding place. It was 3 rows of containers that seemed tightly packed together, but they offered enough space for someone small to crawl in between them. Squeezing through the tight passage, he heard the distant call that the Seeker was on his way to find the hiding kids. The rules were simple. The Seeker had to find those hiding, and when he found one, then the unlucky kid would also become a Seeker. If every kid was found, then the original Seeker wins. But if the Seekers give up or can't find everyone in 10 minutes, then the remaining kids hiding win. It was simple but fun in large numbers. It was all about being sneaky and playing tricks. Everything was valid in the game for both sides. "Found you," a voice said Neeby, but not directed at him. "Aw, poop," a dejected voice replied before scampering feet moved away to continue their search. Wyatt smiled as time went by and he checked his timer display. 5 minutes had already passed. Now all he needed to do was... A sudden shock broke his line of thoughts, and he heard several cries of surprise echoing around the bay. What was that? He muttered to himself as he felt the entire ship trembling and shaking before another great shock made the ship groan in protest. Metal crying much like a wounded beast. An alarm wailed and chaos ensued. "Wisto!" he cried out, now regretting his hiding spot as he struggled to move out of his selected dark, cramped hideout. "Wantum! Waldia! I'm here, guys!" He shouted for his friend's help, but the sirens were too loud, and the panicking cries of almost 24 children complicated things tremendously. A third shock followed, this one much, much closer than the others, enough that it rattled everything in the bay. Wyatt felt his head hit the hard surface of the container behind him, and darkness overtook him. When he woke from his slumber, the first thing he noticed was that his head hurt, but he didn't feel anything wet, so he wasn't bleeding. That was good. The second thing he noticed was that the alarm was gone, and so were the cries of his friends and classmates. "Wisto?" he called out, his mind still in a haze but quickly regaining his senses. "Guys, what happened? Are we in trouble with Miss Carla?" he asked, afraid of what Miss Carla would say to them, and regretting having broken the rules just because he was bored of doing nothing. He started to crawl out of his hiding spot when a sudden cry of terror froze his blood, and he stopped where he was, unable to move. Another cry of terror followed, then a cry of pain, then silence. His legs trembled in fear, not knowing what was happening, but whatever caused those screams was not a good thing. "Wantum," he whispered, trying in vain to reach out to any of his friends. "Waldia?" He didn't move from his spot. He was too frightened to dare. His cowardice was rewarded a few seconds later when he heard gunshots and the hissing sound of laser weapons discharging. More screams followed, angry noises and heavy metal boots. Then he heard the squirming, wiggling sound of something heavy moving fast. Many somethings. Another cry of pain and a shout of defiance before the doors of the bay were open and people rushed inside, firing wildly. He could now hear the voices clearly as they moved closer and closer to his hiding spot. "Stop them! I command you to stop them! I'm out of ammo! Where did they come from? They found us! Close the doors! It's too late! The last voice suddenly stopped and the slump of a body hitting the deck was heard. "No, no, please, no, I have a family!" a man begged, and then he too was silenced. A mighty cry of fury came from someone, and the wiggling noises responded in kind. The screaming voice died out a moment later. One by one fell until only one person remained. Wait, I surrender!" the voice, nasal and desperate, exclaimed. From his hiding spot, he couldn't see all that well, but he recognized the clothes of a noble. He also was able to see 4 of the wriggling figures that made those awful, creepy noises. They were tall, dressed in strange suits, and were definitely not human. The things were standing on 4 legs, oddly bent and angled legs that supported their long, lanky bodies. Instead of arms, they had several vines sticking where their shoulders and shoulder blades should be if they were human. The more Wyatt looked at the non-human things, the uglier they became. 4 spindly arms stuck out from their bellies, and a bulbous head with, admittedly, pretty and colorful petals that made them look so strange. They were like plants, and Wyatt saw that they had beady black eyes, many of them, and no mouth. He wondered how they talked without a mouth when he remembered watching a video during a class about the creatures he was seeing right now. They were Drazan, evil aliens that ate people. Now he was even more scared, and he wet his suit, trying to remain as still as possible. He saw the noble slap his left wrist and bowed before the Drazan. Please, hear me out. I surrender. I am more valuable to you alive than as cattle, the noble said, and Wyatt recognized him at last. He was messy, with sweat pouring down his face and tears threatening to fall down his cheeks. The Drazen stopped and their petal waved in harmonious colors for a few seconds. Then, the tallest one present stepped forth and pointed a vines tipped with a dagger-like claw at the noble. Amusing joke. Feed speaks. A monotone voice of a translator AI came from its suit. Yes, yes, I speak. I offer you a bargain, the noble said on the verge of tears, legs shaking in panic. Bargain offer? Feed is feed. Your meat good. We no deal with cattle, animal, the Drazen replied. Then you won't lose anything if you hear me out, will you? He insisted. You want more food? I can give you more. The Drazen's petals seemed to agitate. Feed lies tricks, old ineffective for cattle. You feed. I do not lie, he pressed on. I'm sure you detected the other freighters coming, yes? He said, and the Drazen went silent for several moments. Only their petals changed colors continuously. If you agree to let me live and give me a shuttle, unharmed, I will ensure that those ships will be within your clutches and won't put up a fight, he said, breath rasping. You already took the space dock over Valak and this ship, but that's nowhere near enough feed for you, right? He asked with a desperate smile spreading across his face. Wyatt could only hear in disbelief what the noble was saying. He was willing to give the Drazen so many children in exchange for his life? He was noble, a Gimor at that, and his life was of course greater than a commoner's. But nobles lead and commoners obey. Weren't nobles supposed to protect the lives of the commoners who served them? Intrigued, captivated. Offer tempting, the Drazen replied after several seconds of silent deliberation. The noble placed his arms on his chest. I could still breed, but why bother with a mere haul of 77 kilos of meat when you can have tons more? Question intrigue. Vessels filled with sprout seedlings? The plant alien asked. Almost entirely of nothing but children. Yes, tender, tasty meat for you to enjoy. Delicious feed. Think about how many you can then turn into cattle. All of that for a single life, and you'll get them without expecting a fight from them, the Gimor said without a shred of compassion nor consideration. Excited, eager. Feed offers good terms, suspicion treachery. Why trust the words of feed? The Drazen asked, before reaching with its extended vine at the frightened Gimor, drawing a line across his cheek, making it bleed. A thin dribble of blood ran down his neck. I swear on the honor of House Gimor that I, Serhan Gimor, will not betray our compact, he replied hurriedly. The lives of lesser nobles and mere commoners are worthless compared to mine. As long as I live, you will have much to gain. If I die or I decide to trigger an implant within me, my family will know of my fate and they'll seek retribution. They'll come here because they know I'm here. You will have to run away, and that means leaving behind much of your precious feed. That was enough for the Drazen to retract its vine. Serhan smirked. But as long as I live, you'll have an entire week to do as you please here. More than enough time to do whatever you want and leave with a full haul of feed. And all it'll cost you is sparing a single life. Mine. Pondering doubt. Betrayal easy, the Drazen countered. Yes, Serhan replied, but I value my life. Take my offer and feast, or take me and leave with meager gains. Their lives are worthless. Mine is not. They will be thankful for the chance to sacrifice themselves for my safety. It is a high honor for them to die in exchange for my exalted self. He paused, staring at the 12 eyes of the Drazen he had been conversing with. After a short eternity that lasted a single breath, he spoke again. Do we have a deal? Deal agreement reached. Lure the feed, feast awaits. You leave after, the Drazen said and retracted its vine in full. After a few seconds, 2 Drazen picked Serhan Gimor up, forcing him to walk on his own and pushed him forth without harming him. Wyatt remained there, stunned after making sense of everything he had just heard. He could hardly process any of it, but he understood enough of the deal Serhan had made with the plant monsters. He gasped for air once his lungs started to burn, reminding him that he had to breathe. Slowly, he crawled out of his hiding spot, fear and worry overriding his senses as hope faded from his heart.